Welcome to the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. I'm KM Weiland, and I am here to take you deep with story theory, writing techniques, and the incredible wisdom of story. I believe story is the greatest power on this earth, and that as writers, we carry the torch of wielding that power with responsibility, passion, and skill. There's no such thing as just a story. Today, it is my honor and my purpose to help you write your best story, astound the world, and maybe change your life. Hello and welcome. You are listening to Season 16, Episode 42, Top Books I Read in 2024. So I wasn't sure how my reading was going to fare in 2024. This year was such a different year for me. I spent the first half cramming a year's worth of work into a few months, and the second half settling into a new house. But perhaps not surprisingly, my reading remained my anchor throughout all of the hectic change. So today, in this quick episode, I'm sharing my top 5 fiction and top 5 nonfic for the entire year. I hope you'll chime in on the website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com with some of your faves from this year. All right, starting with my top 5 fiction books. Number 1 is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. Now, I was not expecting to like this so much, but the characters sucked me in to the point where I literally couldn't stop turning pages. It does have its clunky moments, mostly in explaining the world building, but it is a smart, well-realized fantasy that is noticeably grounded in the author's understanding of the military. I'm currently reading the sequel, and it's definitely right up there as well. Then we have In the Likely Event, also by Rebecca Yarros. When I first skimmed through this to begin with, it didn't grab me, and I almost didn't read it, but I'm so glad I did. It is a beautifully executed love story with excellent characters and an aching realism in the Afghanistan war scenes. The story is masterfully crafted, rising above genre tropes into an ode that seems to me to have come from deep within the author's heart. It wouldn't be an end-of-year book list without a Pratchett novel, and this year we have Equal Rights. Terry Pratchett does this thing where his comic fantasy books just sort of ramble along. They're funny and enjoyable, but not necessarily amazing. And then the third act hits, and the whole thing gets epic. Granny Weatherwax bumbling through most of the book, fooling even the readers into thinking she's just a dealer in folk remedies and superstitions, only to have her best the entire school of wizardry in an epic show of skill, was one of the best things I've ever seen so far in this series. And then we have The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. Truly, this is one of the most powerful narrative voices ever put on paper. The nuance and complexity of Holden's pain, the dissonance between what he says, what he believes, and what he really believes, is beautifully captured. And the love between him and his sister is deeply touching, and the overall effect tragically thought-provoking. And finally, Caught Up by Liz Tomford. I wasn't expecting this one to get me in the feels so hard, but it surely did. The characters were beautiful, the unfolding relationship always felt spot on without any unnecessary drama. The characters felt true and well realized, and the female main character's relationship with the baby boy had me in tears multiple times. Beautiful. All right, and my top 5 nonfiction books, starting with The Witch by Ronald Hutton. So after visiting Salem, Massachusetts last fall, I have felt a driving need to understand the history of the witch trials. This is, so far, the best resource I have found. It is dense and extremely conscientious in its details, but the scholarship is top-notch. It speaks less to the actual historical events and more to the anthropological development of the circumstances and cultures that led to the European witch hunts. Fascinating, disturbing, and ultimately hopeful, it moves beyond pop culture or pat answers to shed light on a dark time, the details of which are too often painted with a thin brush. Then we have Biohack Like a Woman by Aggie Lal. This book presents a relatively simple approach to basic holistic good health practices, but I definitely picked up some new tips and inspiration. I have to admit I hadn't even really considered that many of the most basic premises of healthy living are different for women than they are for men. Gave me lots of food for thought and has helped me hack some of my own health practices to better effect. Next up is Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. This is exceptionally thought-provoking, even though the title might more appropriately, if less punchily, have simply been Food Production. The book creates a new baseline through which to understand ancient history, and particularly the course of social development. It does get a bit repetitive in areas, but at the end of the day, I didn't mind since the information is dense and there's a lot to process. And then Feng Shui for Dummies by David Daniel Kennedy. So despite its title, this is the most detailed and useful feng shui guide I've read so far. It gets down to the practicalities while still presenting the larger system and philosophy, which I had a lot of fun learning as I moved into a new house this year. It is what finally helped me get it. And finally, The Ethical Investor by Nicole Haddow. Now, the only thing I didn't like about this book was it was for Australians, which I didn't know when I first got it. If it had been country specific to me, I would no doubt have found it as useful as Haddow's country mates probably do. As it is, much of the specific info wasn't of much use to me. However, I did feel her approach offered me information and ideas that were invaluable for carrying over to my own financial structure, especially since surprisingly few books exist on the topic of ethical and sustaining investment, at least that I've found so far. And if nothing strikes your fancy there to add to your to-be-read pile next year, you might also remember to check out some of my books, including my Gaslamp Fantasy Wayfarer, my Dieselpunk Adventure Storming, my Portal Fantasy Dreamlander, and my historical novel, Behold the Dawn. And I hope you'll stop by the site, tell me your opinion. What were your top books of 2024? How many books did you read? Tell me in the comments. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Helping Writers Become Authors. I hope you'll stop by the site for a full transcript of this episode and to join in the conversation in the comments. Tune in for next week's episode, where we'll continue to explore all things writing and storytelling. If you'd like to support the podcast, it always means a ton when you take a moment to leave a quick rating or review on Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, or Spotify. To stay updated on all the latest content I create for you, the best way is to join my mailing list at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com/mailing list. You'll also immediately gain access to lots of free resources, including my books, Crafting Unforgettable Characters and 5 Secrets of Story Structure. For real-time connection with me, more writing advice, and behind-the-scenes glimpses, follow me on Instagram at authorkmwyland. A heartfelt thank you to each one of you for your support and enthusiasm, and especially those of you who support my work on patreon.com/kmwyland. You help make my site, this podcast, and so many other resources available to writers everywhere. So until next week, keep writing, keep dreaming, and most importantly, keep being true to your stories. Thank you for being part of helping writers become authors.